Our scripture passage today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 10 through 28. Hear this good news. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth is what defiles them." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" He replied, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into the pit." Peter then said, "Explain the parable to us." Jesus looked at him and said, "Are you still so dull? Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. But eating with washing hands does not defile them." Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. All right, so what we have here are two different passages that at first glance don't seem to really connect to one another. And I must admit to you that as I was preparing for today, I found this to be a very difficult passage to get my head and my soul around. Now, the first part of it is very simple, and this is, those of you who've listened to me preach for years, you know that this is pretty much consistent with my belief system, that rules-based religions ultimately do not serve humanity very well. And so Jesus is talking and responding to a complaint from the Pharisees, who were the religious fundamentalists of his day. They were the literalists. That his disciples did not wash their hands properly before they ate. So the belief system was that you had to follow a very strict ritual to cleanse your hands, because if you ate something and your hands were unclean, then that would make you unclean. That was a big thing, cleanliness. You couldn't touch a Gentile. You could not go into a Gentile's home. Or a woman who was having her menstrual cycle was considered unclean because of the blood. I mean, there was just all kinds of things that made a person unclean, and then you had to go through these rituals in order to make yourself clean and able to go into public again. So the religious fundamentalists of Jesus' day were very strict on these rules. So Jesus challenged it by saying, what defiles a person is not what you ingest, because you ingest it, it goes through your system, and then it leaves. But it's what comes out of your mouth that defines what kind of soul you have. And it's from one's inner self, from one's psyche, from one's heart, from one's soul, that if you do evil or if you behave immorally, then that comes from inside. It has nothing to do with how you washed your hands that day. So the disciples then asked Jesus to please explain the parable to him, and I thought it was interesting that Jesus just says to them, "Are you still so dull?" Okay. Now, one thing that I have found about the Gospel of Matthew, maybe I knew it before, but I've discovered it for the first time or again, is that throughout this gospel, he is explaining Jesus' parables, more so than I recall in the other gospels. Could be wrong, but it's strange because you typically don't see the explanation behind the parables. That's for us to try to figure out. But Matthew, throughout his gospel, continues to explain things. So it seems to me that that part of the lesson is pretty obvious. It's not what you do externally that makes your heart hard or evil or manipulative or that creates the harm, but it's what's internal. What kinds of things have influenced your mind and your heart and your soul as you've lived in this world? What are your belief systems? You see. And then we go to this story where the disciples are eating, and this Canaanite woman, a Gentile, comes out crying and creating a commotion. Lord, Son of David, please heal my daughter. She is possessed, and whatever she's possessed by, no one can seem to heal. And Jesus doesn't even respond to her. Then later, the disciples get so tired of her constant pleading, they ask Jesus to please tell her just to go away. She's aggravating. Now, what I see in this passage is something that I don't really want to see. And what I'm sensing in this passage, and even asking the question, why did they include this story? Is that maybe what they're showing is that even for Jesus at that time of his life, and definitely for the disciples, they held their own prejudice towards certain groups of people. Could Jesus have been so hard-hearted and cruel? I mean, there are many other stories where he encounters Gentiles, people who are not Jewish, and he has great praise and compassion for them. And yet this woman, he seems to treat cruelly. For there's a point where he says, woman, what I have to offer is only for the children of Israel, which you are not. Therefore, I have nothing to give you. Please leave us alone. This seems totally out of Jesus' character, but maybe even Jesus held someplace in his psyche where he was somehow not compassionate toward this particular person. But you see, the woman receives her miracle because she does what we see in most miracle stories of the Bible. She is persistent and she is not giving up. It is not right to feed the dogs, Jesus said, food that was meant for God's children. Not right to feed the dogs? Was he referring to her as a dog? Dehumanizing her? This seems totally out of Jesus' character. But you see, she is not going to be deterred. And she matches Jesus' wits by saying, but yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table. So yes, I might be a dog. You might have been sent for the children of Israel and them only. But here I am, even a dog. If you can just give me the scraps of what it is that you have, I'm sure it will meet my need and my daughter's need. And then there's a reversal. There's a turnaround where Jesus is able to say, oh my goodness, your faith has granted your request. And her daughter was healed immediately. I don't know about you, but that's kind of a hard story to swallow, isn't it? What I find interesting, too, in this story is that she changes Jesus' mind with her persistence. Now, this is not something that is new in the Bible. I remember when I was in seminary and doing my Old Testament classes, surveys, when one of my Dr. Durham brought before the class the fact that God's mind can be changed about things. And one of the classic stories is that while Moses was on the mountaintop receiving the 10 Commandments, the people lost faith in him. He was gone too long. They didn't trust the leadership on the ground. And so they started rebelling against God and started melting down their gold and their silver and making idols. And God was furiated. And God says, Moses, you would not believe what is going on down there. Oh, this was a huge mistake. I think that I will take the fires of heaven and just consume them all now, and we'll try to start over again some other time. But it was Moses who said, Lord, what would the world around us, say if you were to do such a thing? For right now, you are the greatest God of all times, and the fact that you were able to take this people in slavery and set them free. If you took people and you liberated them from slavery and brought them to the wilderness to be consumed by fire, what would people think of you? And God changed God's mind. So somehow this woman changed Jesus' mind, when his first response was none whatsoever. And then she tested him with her wits. Now, why this story? In answering that question, I had to go back to the gospel. It's the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew's gospel is a Jewish gospel written to a Jewish audience. So obviously Matthew had a need, first of all, to let them know that to follow the religious fundamentalists of their day is to follow blind people who are going to lead them all into the ditch, right? So he's trying to broaden their minds as to what the law and their religion and the needs of the religion were all about. Don't go with the fundamentalists. But then he tells the story about the Canaanite woman. From a historical point of view, the only thing that I can imagine why Matthew included this story is to use it as a challenge to his own people, that this gift from God, this revelation from God, this enlightenment from God is one that is not exclusively for them, but that even those in the Gentile world around them can also experience the blessings of God. That's not a big stretch now, is it? But what if Jesus of Nazareth and his disciples held a prejudice toward this woman and her race and her gender? Is that a possibility? Anybody in this country's history who has received rights that did not have them before, they started their protests and the marches and their lobbying, did so only through persistence. Persistence. The powers that be typically do not grant the power to the people who need equality and justice unless the protest and the resistance is so great that it changes their mind. So let's take a look at the United States of America for one moment. It seems that we are a nation that truly hates one another. And even when things have happened to us nationally, we can't even come together at this time to come together nationally to fight off a virus or to change or to challenge foreign interference in our government. Even wearing a mask became a partisan issue. And we hate each other, it seems. And the things that we say about each other come from our mouths. And you know what? This attitude that we seem to have toward one another on this day is not something that happened because we didn't wash our hands properly, but rather it has become a part of our inner self. It has become a part of our psyche, which is the Greek word for soul. It has become a part of our thinking and in our belief systems. That if you do not talk like me, look like me, act like me, believe like me, then you're the enemy. There's no in-between place. It's not, okay, we can agree to disagree, but we're all still in this together. And it seems that there is just one group after another who's constantly making enemies of each other. And this does not come from not washing our hands or observing religious rules. It comes from within us. And I feel and believe that we as a nation must watch what comes out of our mouths and to look and to see who and what we are prejudiced against. What also makes this hatred that we seem to have for each other, it comes from our culture, it comes from the color of our skin, it comes from our religion, it comes from our political preference, it comes from so many different areas to inform this hatred. If you are not thinking and agreeing with me, then you are my enemy, and I will do whatever I need to do. A lot of it comes from people's religious beliefs. And it seems to me that any religion on this planet that uses God as a justification and a rationalization to spew hate, to create discord, to create pain and suffering, to justify slavery, to justify injustice, to justify locking children up in cages, is a religion that simply needs to go away. Where is this national hatred coming from? And what are we willing to do to face it and to challenge it? Who are the heroes? I recently saw the movie Harriet, and it's about Harriet Tubman. And as I was contemplating throughout the week about why this Canaanite woman and why Jesus' response in this way, then after seeing this movie, I saw it in a different light. Here is this incredible character in American history who was fearless. She would rather die than be a slave, and she took incredible risk. But she was a person also of incredible faith, and her faith was about saving lives and freeing slaves. She made, as guest, 13 trips from where she was free back to the slave owners in Maryland, and probably 13 trips, and she personally liberated 70 people. She was active in the abolitionist movement. She was active in lobbying with President Lincoln to set her people free, to create the emancipation in the southern states. She also knew what had to happen to free slaves in this country. There was going to have to be a conflict. There's this lovely story that I want to share with you. That's a quote from hers. And it goes with, God won't let Master Lincoln beat the South till he does the right thing, she said. And then she tells this parable. Master Lincoln is a great man, and I am a poor Negro. But the Negro can tell the Master Lincoln how to save the money and the young men. He can't do it. He can do it by setting the Negro free. Suppose that was an awful big snake down there on the floor. He bites you. Folks all scared because you die. You send for a doctor to cut the bite, but the snake rolled up there, and while the doctor is doing it, he bites you again. Then the doctor dug out that bite, but when the doctor was doing it, the snake sprang up and bit you again. And he keeps on doing it, and it keeps on biting you until you kill the snake. That's what Master Lincoln ought to know. She was very much a part of the abolitionist movement and freeing slaves in the United States. And she went on not only to be a part of the Underground Railroad that led people, but how did this poor black woman in the United States, who was not even seen as a full human being to many people, accomplish what she did? She used her wits. When she went to go free people in Maryland from the slave owners, she only did it in the winter. Why? Because the slaves were not out in the field working every day, and if they went missing, no one would notice it as quickly. She also only did it on Saturday night. Why? Because the newspapers would not be able to write an article about it and announce it for people to be on the lookout until Monday morning. They could already be well on their way. She communicated to the people when it was time, or what they needed to do, or where they needed to go, by singing songs and using words in those songs as a code to help them along the way. She was smart. She was fearless. And she was completely committed to her mission. Not long after that, she became a spy for the Union Army. And she was able to give them information that helped tremendously in them being able to win battles and to create their strategies in defeating the South. Not only that, she led a group of Union soldiers to go free some slaves, and the soldiers went there to go burn the plantations that were providing goods and supplies to the Confederate Army. On that day, they freed 750 slaves and steamboats and took them up the river. She was an incredible human being. The abolitionist movement prevailed. Slaves were freed. Mr. Lincoln listened. But you know what? They didn't do it from their compassion. Not to say that there weren't people passionately and compassionately involved, but any great change in this nation where the power sets does not happen from a place of compassion, it comes from a place of power. So the abolitionist movement came from changing the laws of the land to free people, to make it illegal to own another human being. Harriet Tubman also was involved in the suffrage movement to give women equal rights. She never stopped. She was always there on the front line, doing all she could to bring out justice and to create equality among citizens of this country. And we go on down the line with equal rights, voting rights, the civil rights, the LGBTQ rights, the women's movement, women's rights. The woman who's working the same job, doing the same task, gets equal pay to the man who does that job. See? And when you think about it, none of these great events within our own history to bring equality and justice to this land happened because someone from a great sense of compassion, let's give it to them. It always comes from a place of a group of people who are so persistent and who are using all the wits in their mind that their persistence for years, for decades at times, stay in place until the change and the healing began. It is my humble belief that we as a nation need to focus on washing and cleansing our heart and our soul as much as we are about not spreading a virus. We as a nation need to take an inventory of who are we as a collective people. We've changed, we've evolved. It can't be like it ever was. Who are we going to be? What are we going to become collectively? It's time. It's time. And the miracle of reuniting this country is not going to happen because people are just full of love and compassion. It's going to happen through persistence and determination and a passionate belief that this is what is right and this is what we must do. I believe that we must have the same determination to stop the hatred in this country as we do of defeating this virus. Now, I will admit to you that I have a hard time with some people. And I don't think nice thoughts about individuals or different groups. But I will make you this promise. I want to be a part of the greater collective that's able to transform not only the souls of individuals, but to transform us collectively, not only as a nation, but the world. And I know in order to do that, I have to deal with those dark places in my own spirit. So I promise you, in that spirit, and the spirit of the Canaanite woman, in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, I promise you that I will start working on it really hard to let go the anger that I feel toward individuals or toward I feel toward groups, so that I can be more a part of the healing process than what I may have been. So what I ask today is, what's in your heart and your soul? How did it get there? Are there parts of our personality, are there parts of our psyche that are angry and that are hate-filled or that are ugly? Are we quick to just completely discredit and denounce individuals or groups of people? Are we? I would ask us all to take a look at that in our own lives, because it's not what's external that's going to defile us, but what comes out of our mouth. So what is coming out of our mouth? And I promise you, I am working on it in my life. And what I'm asking you today is this: what are you committed to do? To make sure that the Canaanite women and the Harriet Tubmans of this world not only receive the justice that they seek and the healing that they need, but that we may make that transition, that the change does not come from power, but the change comes from a collective compassion, that all people are God's people. What are we committed to do? Go with peace and purpose. Amen.